Thank you for coming out on this nasty, rainy day. The Contemporary Arts Center acknowledges that our building occupies land that has been the traditional land of the Adena, Hopewell, Miamia, or Miami, Shawandasa, Tula, or the Shawanaki Shawnee, and the, the Wahazi, Manzan, or Osage peoples. We recognize them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. By understanding our region's past and educating ourselves on pre-colonial and colonial history, we can recognize narratives that have been whitewashed or erased.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marcus Marjoram. I'm the Deputy Director, Chief Business Officer, and currently the Interim Director for the CAC. And just wanted to welcome you all here this evening. I think you're in store for a wonderful new exhibition that you're going to hear from our curators and artists in a moment. But before we start, I always like to just remind us why we're all here. The Contemporary Arts Center brings art and the creative process to all people through exhibitions, performances, and experiences that expand minds. I always like to start off with our mission statement, not only through exhibitions, but in our staff meetings and everything else, just to ground us in regards to why the CAC is important. So with that, I just want to give one announcement. At 9 p.m., there will be an improvisational dance performance here on the 5th floor, so I just want to remind everyone about that. But with that, I will turn it over to our curator, Amara, and we can start this wonderful evening off. Amara?
Thank you, Marcus, and welcome everyone. My name is Amara Antilla. I'm the Senior Curator at Large here at the CAC, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all tonight for the opening celebration of Breaking Water. This is an exhibition that has been in the works and in the research phase for nearly 3 years now, and I'm really thrilled to finally welcome you all here for the opening festivities. It's an exhibition that features work by 17 artists who engage ecologies through a feminist lens, thinking about the properties of water as a porous, adaptable liquid that connects our bodies with the environments that sustain us. The exhibition explores wetness as a framework through which to consider our relationship to nature, other organisms, and society at large. The title, Breaking Water, is borrowed from a new commission by 2 artists, Calista Lyon, who is here with us today, and Carmen Wynant, which looks at water as a kind of catalyst for thinking about societal paradigm shifts, juxtaposing imagery of breaking water in the context of both childbirth and river restoration projects. The installation emphasizes what it means to be an agent of transformation and resilience. And we'll be talking more about this with the artists during the artist panel in a few minutes. I'd like to also thank some of the people who really contributed to making this project possible, including my co-curator, Clelia, Coussonnet, who is based in France and has been an important kind of thought partner throughout the process, as well as Stephanie King, assistant curator here at the CAC. I also want to acknowledge the entire curatorial team who have worked tirelessly over the past 2 weeks to put the exhibition together, and in all of the months and years leading up to today. And I'll just name them briefly. Tyler Hamilton, David Dillon, Rebecca Roman, Lindsay McCartney, Kara Xavier, Adrian Dixon, Sarah Togson, and Brian Wood. And also, of course, thank you to the entire CAC staff who collaborate together to really, make all of this possible. I also want to start by thanking our 2022 exhibition year sponsors who have supported the entire programming for this year's calendar events. And these include Gail and Dave Beckett, Jimmy and Lauren Miller, Barbara Weston Sasser and Carol Weston Roberts, and the Jason McCraw Endowment Fund. Breaking Water itself was sponsored generously by several foundations and philanthropic groups, including the Andy Warhol Foundation for Visual Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, and additional funding was provided by the Étant Donné Contemporary Art Fund, a program of FACE, the French-American Cultural Exchange Foundation, and the Finnish Cultural Foundation, and Frame Contemporary Art Finland, as well as Sue Friedlander and David and Sarah Osborne. So we're very grateful for their generosity in making this exhibition possible. At this point, I'd like to invite Clelia to the podium to say a few more words about the exhibition and introduce our artists. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this rainy day, but I think it's more, we were discussing with one of the artists, blessing of water for this very nice Breaking Water exhibition. So I'd like to join my thanks to Amara's ones, and I would also like to thank all the members of the CAC staff for all their help in this process of preparing the exhibition and installing it. I'm really grateful. And I would like to thank you, Amara, for inviting me. It's been really a very nice collaboration, and I appreciate very much you trusting me over these 3 years of collaboration. I would also like to thank all of the artists, so the ones that are present with us tonight, but also all the other artists who are participating and welcomed our invitation to be part of this process. So Amara already gave you like some insights into the exhibition topic. I would just like to add a couple of things because it's been really like a very long process of research over these 3 years. And I think the artists have also really collaborated a lot with us in a way and also made our whole thinking evolve. So this is something quite important for me. So I would also like to say that starting from looking at water as our origin, some of the artists also consider mythology, aquatic rights, and also indigenous approaches to water. Speculation on new horizons, but also imagining different ways of coexistence and collectivity are really crucial points in the exhibition, and you will see several examples of this through the works in the show. I think it's also quite important to state that in a time of ecological urgency, many of the works are really thinking about the ethics of water and how to reclaim and protect its rights, and some of the artists will talk a bit more about it. And they also speak about how it's important to find a balance, a dynamic balance, I would say, between all of the different ecosystems that coexist. So Breaking Water is really like considering water as an interface and also as a trigger for change and transformation. So maybe as a closing remark, I hope you will feel as inspired by the works in the exhibition as we have been during the entire research process, finding out what water can teach us. So that's really, I hope, what you will be experiencing when you can go to the exhibition. Now I would like to introduce the artists that are here with us tonight. First, Claudia Peña Salinas, who is based in New York, will be presenting her practice. Then we will have Jaana Laakkonin, who is based in Helsinki in Finland. Third, we'll have Vian Sora, who is based in Louisville. And then we'll have Calista Lyon, who is based in Columbus. Thank you so much for your attention.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. The installation upstairs, titled Ohiocan, is based on 2 Aztec water deities. So here you see one. This is Tlaloc, and he's the god of heavenly waters and lightning, and he's outside of the Anthropology Museum of Mexico. And then here you have Chachihuitlicue, and she's the goddess of earthly waters, of lakes and springs. And she's inside of that same museum in Mexico City, inside of what would be the Teotihuacan room, which is an archaeological site about an hour away from Mexico City. And I'm gonna show one project, one installation I did for Arizona State University that centered around these two water deities too. And for that, I visited Teotihuacan, and I was more specifically looking at these housing complexes that have very low walls, where you can see murals, and you walk around them almost like labyrinths. And I was interested in this aspect of having the body kind of moving around and looking, having the eyesight low. And so here's what the installation looked like in that museum. And I placed all the brass sculptures low on the ground, and also the objects. So in a way, thinking about excavation sites, how these objects could be almost like these uncovered objects. And also thinking about reversing the pedestal, so things are low instead of on top. And then on one side, you had a postcard enlarged of the Chachuitlicue deity, and then in color. So I think that postcard is from 1964 when the museum was opened. And then on the other side is the same monolith, but in the time when it was discovered next to the Moon Pyramid in Teotihuacan. And it's in black and white, and you see the back. And it's, in this case, it's in a different museum. So in the early stages of archaeology in Mexico, they didn't really have a museum per se, so all these objects were being gathered and placed in one space, and not really understanding what they were doing with them. And so things were displayed in kind of a strange way, kind of like objects to the side. So that's just to say that with these two postcards, I wanted to think about two times and two places in the history of archaeology of Mexico. And then on the other side of this room, there was a video playing that showed water images and images of the deity itself, and kind of like a travelogue where I'm gathering images and related to these water deities. But there are three words that would come in and out of the imagery, and it's the name of the deity Chachuitlicue, and then the name of Metzi, which is moon, and then the name of water, Atl. And this is all in Nahuatl, which is the Aztec indigenous language. And the words would break in and out, so in a way it was a play of language, not so much a straight kind of narrative video. And this video will be playing here along another one in the, I guess in this room, right? In this month, May. And then just to end, I wanted to show how the exhibition upstairs came about. So this is a space in Mexico where my family is from. It's in the northern of Mexico, and there's a river just behind this space. So I set up a studio about, I would say, a year ago to work on the stones that you will see in the installation. This is the river I was collecting them from. And as you can see, the river is, almost non-existent. It's almost like very thin and almost not moving. This is caused by drought, but also like poor water management in this part of Mexico. And then here is kind of an image of me experimenting with the stones, kind of thinking about what they would be doing in the space or how they would be placed. And then one last image that shows another site where I collected the wood pylons or wood pieces that are at one point were part of bridges or any of man-made structures. So I was interested in kind of finding these pieces that had at one point been manipulated by man, and had somehow drifted and ended up in this bay. This is Coney Island Creek in New York. So, but you'll have a chance to see all this upstairs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Sorry, just before we move up to Jaana, we will also have time for a Q&A with the audience at the end of the session, so you know. And Amara, should I go with one question, or do we move to Jaana?
I think it would be great if everyone could present, and
Yeah,
then we could
perfect.
have questions after.
Great. So, Jaana, up to you.
Yes, hello. Let's start with facts. This is an A4 standard paper, and it's here to prevent us from overflowing over the intended duration, border, frame of the presentation. The name of my work that is exhibited at CAC, D/Hereouts, is hard to pronounce, not least because it is not a word. It was not used to be a word. As written in sans serif, it begins to look like an image, object, entity, perhaps a place or a name of a planet. It consists of words or where and ouch. Most of these works that you can see in the 5th floor were made for the 2nd floor of a former yarn factory in rural central France. There is no question if that residency and art space called Traignac Projet has made my practice and these works. It is a question of incalculable amounts of being affected and even being reset. What I understand as the 2nd floor is in France the 1st. I poured water from the same bottle for myself and for my works. The bricks of the neighboring building did border the space more visually than otherwise. The cinder blocks hosted lizards, flies, bats, and warmth in many senses of the word. After working and living there for a couple of summers, and during a couple more that I visited, I made these works having in mind that one can only feel one and lonely, L-O-N-E-L-Y, but being alone is impossible. We have never been modern is a sentence and a name of a book by Bruno Latour, published in 1991. In the first pages of it, Latour uses newspaper as an example of divisions and problems that lie in the core of the Western modernity. The newspaper is divided into sections such as politics, sports, environment, economics, weather, culture, national news, international news, even if no thing really fits under only one of those categories. The sports is not only sports, it is but economics, also politics. International news are not apart from national ones, and environment, etc. We Have Never Been Human is a chapter in Donna Haraway's book, When Species Meet, published in 2008. I quote her, "I love the fact that human genomes can be found in only about 10% of all the cells that occupy the mundane space I call my body. The other 90% of the cells are filled with the genomes of bacteria, fungi, protists, and such, some of which play in a symphony necessary to my being alive at all, and some of which are hitching a ride and doing the rest of us no harm. I am vastly outnumbered by my tiny companions. Better put, I become an adult human being in company with these tiny messmates. To be one is always to become with many." End quote. So neither have artworks ever been artworks. Sounds dramatic, but paintbrush, Photoshop, and artist talks have moved lives and non-lives a way further than is repeatedly written in the stories. If you prefer a less dramatic subject-predicate structure, one could say artworks have been part-taking in moving and shaping lives and non-lives. Location of our bodies, concepts, and action called, for example, being, living, working, or eating, exhibiting, and speaking, is most likely forever ungraspable, but nevertheless very worth pondering, critically and enjoyably, which do not exclude each other. With my practice, I constantly get to experience, notice, and test how the making and living are shared, co-done. Human and non-human, here and there, expressive and conceptual, matter and meaning, cannot have a slash between them. Instead of demanding neat, painful understanding, I hope my works and these slides and words serve as an invitation to fluid thinking with. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaana, and welcome, Vian.
Oh my God, okay. Hello, everyone. I'm participating in this show with 7 works from a series called Floodgate. And Floodgate started in 2020, right after the pandemic started, and it was a response to the pandemic. And since my work centers somehow around trauma, I lived the first 3 decades of my life in Iraq under dictatorship and witnessed multiple wars. And that was, the pandemic was kind of similar in some way in terms of, you know, the isolation, the danger. I mean, I wouldn't compare it to a war, but it was the most similar situation in terms of, you know, hiding at home, thinking about survival. So the work, in essence, deals with survival threats, missing life. This work here is Bathers. I started this, just kind of was missing. It was a sense of missing life, missing activities, being intimate with your surrounding. And I kind of use kind of biomorphic figures that lend itself to be a little bit abstracted. The other work is antibodies. And I did this work right after I had a severe case of COVID. And it kind of, it's like, you know, an environment of bodily fluids and antibodies and, you know, kind of fighting within one being. So, okay. These are some inspiration kind of, I don't know, deities and gods from Mesopotamia that kind of centers around cities that was destroyed 5,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia. Iraq suffers a lot with not just war, but also the desertation. So these antiquities are all kind of deal with these matters. This is also Riverbed, and it is the last work in the series, Floodgates. And it took me kind of a year to complete this work, and it was mainly informed by the tornado that destroyed Mayfield, Kentucky. And it kind of deal with water as a force of destruction. So you see the floating kind of body parts, but also kind of there is a survival element in the end. These are cities that was found underwater in Iraq that was dried over the last 100 years at will. And I kind of use this slide because it informs, it's kind of the lamaso, the creature that was a symbol of protection in Iraq, and it kind of informed the architecture that is in this slide next. This is the University of Baghdad that was designed by Walter Gropius, and it was largely designed based on being centered by the Tigris to kind of, have the climate. Sorry, I forgot that one actually. The Tigris, I'm actually sorry. I'm gonna flip to the next one. The Tigris kind of generates waves of cold air in Iraq, we call Badgir, and it informed these elements of architecture. And then this slide was a bench by Zaha Hadid that I actually was inspired by because it kind of used similar elements and curves that Walter Gropius used for that matter. And this is part of the collection of the late Al-Shans at the Great Meadows Foundation in Louisville. And he was a huge supporter of my work. So I found this was fascinating for me to see it in Louisville, Kentucky. Hold on. These are actually, this slide connect to bathers. This is the figure, the protecting deity that I used in the left side of it. And then these are all kind of reliefs that was found underwater in the Tigris. And this is going back to bathers. Hold on. This is kind of shows the process that I use water in the first kind of 5 layers that shows how the work evolves after adding like 10 layers of water and adding and stripping color, and then finally finish the work with oil. This is going back to the sketch of antibodies, where it shows how the process work looked like, but then this is originally the idea of two entities fighting in one body within water. So kind of show you the separation of the drawing and the completed work. Right. Sorry, I forgot the third slide. Yeah.
Thank you, Vian. And now, Calista.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Breaking Water is a collaboration with writer and artist Carmen Wynant. From the beginning of this project, Carmen and I were centered on the human experience of what psychologists have termed ecological grief, which refers to the sense of loss, fear, sadness, and dread that arises from experiencing or learning about environmental degradation. We asked how might human experiences with water signal a shift in consciousness, away from helplessness, denial, and paralysis towards something like awakeness and action in addressing ecological collapse. Breaking Water is a video installation on 21 CRT televisions, which sit on tables fashioned from recycled timber, which was built by the team here at the CAC. With a big thank you and indebtedness to Chief Preparator Tyler Hamilton for the design and build of these tables. So from the center of the roof, there's going to be a speaker that projects our voices reading a text we have researched and written. We have collected found video footage in 3 main categories that come together to form a living archive. So that involves close-up details of water flowing, bursting, erupting, gushing, amniotic sacs being broken in the human body, a signal of oncoming birth, and dam walls exploding during river restoration projects. So these are long-term collaborative projects that remove failing and unused dam wall infrastructure to reconnect river pathways. This reinstates aquatic connectivity, including migratory fish species that sometimes have been disconnected for upwards of 100 years. So when thinking about the audio component of this work, we drew from artworks including Ronnie Horn's Saying Water, which is it was made in 2012, and it was a monologue. The recorded narration shares research material alongside story, and we include excerpts from environmental organisations like American Rivers through to the central texts that influenced our thinking, which include anthropologist Andrea Ballesteros' A Future History of Water, where she conducts field work with state officials, NGOs, politicians and activists who are really looking and fighting for to implement water as a human right. And this book was really helpful for us because we come to understand the ways that we must move beyond an imagined future revolution to really understand, to act in the capacities that we have. So she has one quote, "The world in front of us is the only actionable one." We also drew heavily from Andreas Malm's How to Blow Up a Pipeline, Fighting a World on Fire, which looks to radical activist practices to address the current inaction on climate change. Malm argues for property destruction and violence as necessary steps in addressing our current ecological predicament. And then through Amara and Clelia's generosity in sharing their research materials, we drew heavily on Astrida Nimis's Hydrofeminism, On or Becoming a Body of Water, which brings together queer, ecological and feminist ideas to demonstrate how we are all constituted of and by water, and how we can use water to understand our interconnectedness. We began our writing with a set of questions that included: what experiences have we had in which we experienced a perspectival breaking through? How do we relate to water in the body, in our own body? How have we forgotten our watery beginnings? What can we learn from water? How do we move past the myth of powerlessness? And how can water be emancipatory? At the beginning of this project, in thinking about how we might create the audience experience, I witnessed the way that larger bodies of water were made visible from a distance through the interplay of light as I moved through space. We began to explore the affective qualities of light, how both image and light paired together might also replicate a sense of this breaking through that we point to through the bodily experiences with water. We tested a number of different iterations. This was a 3-channel digital projection, but it didn't really sort of offer the physicality of light that we were looking for to envelop the viewer. And we then started testing on CRT televisions, and their physical presence was really helpful and was kind of what we were looking for. And it was this experience and quality of light that we wanted to use alongside sort of reusing obsolete technology. We were thinking about artworks like Gretchen Bender's 1987 work Total Recall and Spencer Finch's 2007 work West, Sunset in My Motel Room. We collected a number of TVs through classified ads on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, which involved a process of meeting and talking with strangers to pick up the TVs. I personally really enjoy this part of the making, as it's a way to sort of share the ideas of the work with communities that may not visit art institutions. And so through collecting the footage of dam demolitions, I watched and listened to Indigenous tribes, local communities, activists, scientists, governmental agencies, and environmental organisations watch dam walls be violently deconstructed, dismantled, and destroyed. I witnessed ecstatic faces, crying, screaming, clapping, folks jumping up and down, sometimes all at once. And I would describe this as a kind of embodied collective joy. Through making this work, I've witnessed the potential of water to be emancipatory. When you fight for and with water, a collaborative effort, a moving beyond yourself, it looks like a kind of freedom. Breaking water makes visible collaborative environmental actions that is dismantling dams that no longer serve a purpose. a form of anthropocentric waste, tied to dominant narratives that have attempted to command and control water to the detriment of rivers and their ecologies and most people. So in closing, we're interested in how experiences with and of water in the body, human and river, might offer a way to break through the idea of the individual into collaborative forms of care and repair. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Calista. Should we go on with, just before we end the mic up to you for some question and answers, we'll just go through some questions with the artists.
Sounds great. Yeah, maybe I'll start with Calista since we just heard from you. It's been a true joy and honor to work with you and kind of watch this work come into being. And you've talked a lot about climate grief and the potential for water to be this emancipatory substance and source. And I'm just curious, how have you experienced any personal transformation in the process of working on this project, and how has your perspective changed after going through the research?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think for me, an artist practice really is about a place to research and learn and grow and learn about things that I really care about and that I think about a lot but maybe don't have space for in the world. And I think that experience has really taught me, this project in particular, the way in which a shifting out of a kind of, like I've felt from a young age, the way that we live is sort of fundamentally against thriving for a lot of species. And I think that through these projects I've witnessed like a direct way in which you can get involved with your community to become more present locally and to work collectively to try to dismantle some of the ways that we've tried to control and command, as I mentioned, bodies of water that also then deeply affect river ecologies, indigenous communities, and it's really, I think, a really incredible example of how a deep collaboration takes place. Sometimes it takes upwards of 10 years to get the kind of collaboration needed and approval to be able to remove a dam, particularly the larger dams like the Conduit Dam in the Pacific Northwest. And they really require everybody getting on board and everybody working together and being in community and being in relationship with each other. And I think that's something that I've learned a lot about in terms of, I think if we are to move past ecological grief, it's going to be the only way that I can see personally is actually being active and working in these communities and working to sort of fight for that in not just making work that shares knowledge about it, but actually being involved in it.
Now I have a question for you, Vian. So it was really interesting to hear about the process of your work and also how you're tying past and present in your work, looking into the artifacts from Iraq and Mesopotamia. And we were wondering also, because you've discussed this notion of trauma, if you could get a bit more into the relation between water and memory, that I feel is part of your work and practice.
Well, I think for me, my first kind of witnessing a big body of water was, maybe I was 3 or 4, and my grandparents walked me into the Tigris. They lived 5 minutes from it. And the stories that I heard of, how the Tigris was a dumping ground for the Mongols for, dumping bodies, but also destroying the libraries of Baghdad and turning the rivers into, ink and blood. And I feel like that was one of these first memories and incidents that informed my work. But also, as cities thrived by the Tigris and Euphrates in the same times, they were destroyed in the same way. And then there was that kind of environmental element to it because of desertation, but also because of war. So that's always there in the work. But then water always served as a moving body where immigrants cross bodies of water to their freedom or to their death. So this is how I think about it in my work. I don't know if that answered that question. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Jaana, I have a question for you. I know this body of work was made for another project last year, but you also spent about a week here working within the space, working within the CAC galleries. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how context plays into your work and your practice and how you relate to the environments in which your paintings are shown.
Yes, there would be many ways to talk about it, but I guess I've been in general interested in thinking of working as co-working and as working with instead of a clear subject-object cuts, in a sense that there is a human being who masters the matter. That is something non-human. And so that's also means that the spaces and places where I work are and become partakers, and maybe I, in a bit underlined way, also ask them to participate and let them do things that are not necessarily always even pleasant, but here has been, yeah. Yeah, I guess that's that. It's also, it's not only the spaces. It could be that the apples that I eat are making my work, or these talks here are shaping how things appear. So also the works are exhibited in spaces, so I have wanted to be also sensitive with things that they are bringing to it.
Claudia, one question for you. So you've described a bit your practice and how you've been centering on the Aztec water deities. I would like to ask you to also tell us why, for this commission, and how you've been inspired by the Ohio River in relation also to your previous investigation, and how you've been creating connection between these two parts.
Well, I think focusing on the Ohio River was almost like I had to. It's such a important part of Cincinnati that, and it has a very rich history, starting with, you know, how it was this division line between the free enslaved territories. So that was already kind of an entry point for me, because I come from a state in the northern part of Mexico. So my kind of history with a river like that is with the Rio Grande. So thinking how these, you know, nature lines are then taken on by humans and they become division lines. How this is, you know, total construct. And then, but also like you know, you see their postcards. So I always start these installations with imagery from postcards that I get on eBay or other sites. And so the Ohio River is rich in imagery from you know, you'll see it in the installation. So going from very kind of romantic scenes with moonlight to other like more natural photographs of when there was flooding or freezing, to the documentation of the various dams or bridges along it. So the river itself was so rich in material to kind of, you know, base the installation out of. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. You'll have a chance to discover all of these works very soon, but first we'd like to also open the questions to you. If anyone is curious to know more about one of the artist's work, and Stephanie will be helping us to pass the mic in the crowd.
This is for Jan. I loved your photo with the wood and your harness and how you hung, and your way to hang is going to be in this place. And so when you saw Zaha Hadid and these columns and you couldn't touch them, did it inspire you? Did it change your vision? Because you worked with wood, harness, and structure, and this is sort of different.
So you mean the see-through polyester that I have tied around the column? Yeah, actually, it came to my mind, well, the polyester was going to be there also when I was thinking about having the shell there. Then when I heard that one can drill in the column, I kind of erased even the column from my head, and I needed Amara's kind and very good thought about it to actually tie the rubber around the column. And yeah, the origin of the rubber is actually a deflated bike tire. So I mean, that's something that there's several directions. There's this architecture that is making things, but there's also these mundane part takers that now are in a weird combination there. Yeah, so it's been pleasant to kind of make these things encounter. Did I reply? Thank you. Good.
Claudia, I wanted to ask about, is the Tlalok sculpture, is that included in this exhibition?
Playing here. So there's two videos, one titled Tlachacan that deals more with Tlaloc, and so there's various kind of tangents that go off from like researching that particular stone, and then deals with like the construction that got halted of the new airport that was going to be on top of the Lake Texcoco. And then like the various copies and the crisis of water of Mexico City. And then the other one, Mexilocan, deals more with Chachihuitlicue, the goddess. So it's included in the kind of idea behind it or something, you know, like the blessing of when I'm making these exhibitions, I'm thinking of these two water deities in relationship to water. All the objects are sourced from water sites.
Yeah, and does like the mythology around that sculpture come into play at all? Like in terms of like...
in the name itself, so in the cosmology of the Aztecs, there's like 13 heavens, and so Tlaloc and Chachihuitlicue are the rulers of the fourth heaven, and that's called Atlalocan. So in this case, the exhibition is titled Ohio-can. So taking that Ohio, which was in the Seneca language, beautiful river, or yes, I think it's a beautiful river. And then adding the can, which is the suffix in Nahuatl, saying place of the Ohio.
Cool. Thank you.
How did you acquire the videos of the women pre-labor?
Yeah, we had a little trouble finding that footage. So we found everything in the show is everything we could find. So we started with representations in film and TV. So the majority of the footage is all fictional. And then I really tried to find some footage that was actual footage, and I was able to find 5 or 6 clips through YouTube. but that was the extent of it. We did very deep dives, and it's a really hard moment to capture and to have a camera out. So we were really thinking about like the representation also being damned of women and the limitations of footage in certain experiences as well.
Hi, this was for Claudia and Vian. Maybe more for Vian, because I think Claudia just answered it, but I was curious about your use of historical sculptures within your work, and also how that influenced your pieces today, and also, because I've seen your work in Louisville, maybe also your work within rivers in this country, in the Midwest. So I'm just curious if you could maybe expand on your practice from thinking about the Tigris rivers to the Ohio, et cetera.
That's actually a good question, because the first works and up to this day, Mesopotamia, and those bodies of works and those antiquities are embedded in the work. But somehow water played some kind of role in my life. Every country I immigrated to, I moved 4 countries within 5 years. So from Baghdad on the Tigris, we lived by the Bosphorus in Istanbul, then in Dubai by the Arabian Gulf, then ending up in Louisville, and somehow there is always a body of water that tells a story. So this is the connection for me, but also, it's the way, it's the path you take to get somewhere, and then all the histories around it. So in that context, this is how I use this history and these antiquities, but also going back to Iraq, those were the first images and the first kind of, stories that was told through murals and 5,000 years old antiquities that was sometimes dug in the wrong way and looted. Because up to this day, we don't have full excavation of important sites in Iraq due to wars and lack of funding and things like that. So it's always evident in my work. I sometimes try to hide it because I don't want it to be about that, but it's part of my identity.
My question's for Calista. Thanks for sharing. My friend and I were talking about determinism versus hope in terms of ecological grief. And I appreciate you sharing that concept with us. And I was just wondering, if you could reflect a little bit more for us on what you think about the potential of images or the potential of art in the imagination of a viewer, and what power that might have to shift from fatalistic outlook to something else?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and something I feel like I grapple with every day in working primarily with images. Sometimes I feel like they can't they can't shift us to that, and other days I feel like they have such an incredible power. And as Carmen, my collaborator, she's written a book on instructional photography. I think that the way photography and images teach us and the way we learn from images is really fundamental. And I think that it's going to take many kinds of experiences, and I think the limitations, I have a lot of feelings around the limitations of what a work like that can do in actively kind of shifting people in terms of their actions, but I deeply value the practice of thinking and working through these ideas and working and talking to communities who are enacting this in the world. And I think if there's a place at all that we can share what people are doing that is maybe hidden or maybe not very known, like up until the 1980s, it was radical to think about a dam being removed, and there was a number of activists that were sort of really pushing hard through the 50s through to the 80s to really try to get action on dam removal. And one of the first dams being removed for ecological reasons was sort of in the 90s in Maine. And I think that the start of that and then the acceleration that we've seen over the last 20 years has just moved incredibly in the way that sort of radical ideas can become conventional. And I think that images fall short in lots of ways, and it's how do we actually make a practice and share with an audience a way to move beyond the image. Maybe the image I think has a lot of power as sort of an anchor for memory, and I really believe in that, but a lot of sort of my work is around performance using images, so it's really about having an embodied experience with an audience in the room and sharing a more complex story around the image. And for me, that's been a way to sort of use a practice as a form of knowledge exchange and to sort of move past the limitations of what an image can do. But I think, moving forward, I'm really interested in, say, how, this work can also have a larger public programming and a life where it is a place to begin a conversation that then can sort of move beyond the institution and out into sort of a learning environment and work with different kinds of activists and ecological historians to be able to have a more active sort of presence around these ideas on the ground.
Thank you, Calista. I think this will be our last question.
This isn't a question, but a comment. One success story is Red River Gorge. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's outside of Lexington, but in the 60s, just a handful of people, maybe 30, they were going to dam it. And they wrote letters. They asked the representatives to come and see it. And it's outstanding ecological nature. And it was just a group of people who were activists. And it became the first of the Sierra Club in Kentucky then. So there's hope.
Well, thank you so much to all of our artists and the audience for the wonderful questions. I also want to thank our sponsors again and all of our members and audience members and welcome you to go up to our 4th and 5th floors where the exhibition is now open. And also just to restate that at 9 p.m. there will be an improvisational performance by Pones, a local dance troupe, which was organized by my colleague Shani Turner. And so that will begin on level 5 and move down to level 4. So please look out for that as well. Thank you.